I thank you very much for tuning in to That Will Never Work podcast. So, you can build a successful business, but will it be remembered? Today we have Evan, and he's going to talk to us about how to build a legacy that lasts long after the spotlight fades. We'll talk about it right after this.
Educate, empower, enable, impact. Thank you for tuning in to That Will Never Work, an award-winning podcast where we share inspiring information and personal experiences related to business and the entrepreneurial journey from those who are leaders in their respective field. Now, here's your host, author and business coach, Maurice.
I thank you very much for tuning in. So I have Evan, and of course, for those of you who have been listening, if you want Evan's bio, you can Google Evan. Like he's an action word. You can Google Evan and find out what's going on with Evan, and listen to his other podcasts he's been on, other information he's provided. But today we're going to talk about business legacy. So Evan, question for you, man. If the business is just surviving in the moment, what does setting up a foundation that speaks for generations to come? How do we get to that point?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question that a lot of business owners are wrestling with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're facing a kind of a crisis in our country right now where we have about 30% of all business owners in the United States are going to retire in the next 10 years. And so that means less businesses to do services, less businesses for jobs. And so there's a huge exodus of business. And on the flip side, only 20% of businesses ever sell. And so we're seeing fewer and fewer businesses change hands. We're seeing a very low success rate with the business actually going down a generation, and 2 generations is almost impossible. And so this is definitely a crisis, this legacy of a business. And I think it goes back to business owners really working inside of their business, but not working on their business. You know, they're inundated with the day in and day out tasks that are in front of them and the things that they're struggling with. And they're not really looking at the bigger picture. How do I make this business last? How do I make it self-sustainable? How do we continue this legacy further down the road? And I think that's one of the reasons why we're not seeing more businesses survive the test of time.
So just bear with me for a moment. This question might be a little off, but thinking about this whole part of business legacy, and you're saying that how it's not translating into 1 or 2 generations after. Is it because, and I'm just going to use this idea, are most of our kids spoiled enough where they don't want to take on that responsibility? You know, they just want to live the life, i.e. like they see on social media, and don't want to bring that information on or put themselves in that position. Have you seen anything like that?
I don't know if spoiled is the right word. I mean, there might be an element of that. You know, I think, you know, I don't know if you have kids, but anybody who has kids, I don't personally have kids, but we know that every kid has a different personality, right?
Right.
So when we're thinking about a business legacy, you know, they might not really jive with the vision and mission that the parents had. You know, maybe the parents weren't present and didn't really bring them into that legacy and show them the importance and nurture that. You know, maybe the kid has different giftings and talents, different directions. You know, and maybe, you know, you have the old school versus the new school mentality on how business should be ran. And so there's a kind of a clashing of heads. You know, dad thinks it should be ran the same way it's always been ran. It works. It makes money. You know, why change it? Don't break it if it don't fix. You know, don't fix it if it's not broken type mentality. And then the kid's like, well, we could be doing social media. We could be doing this. We could be doing that. And so I think there is a collision of ideas as well. And so it's hard. It's really hard to transfer ownership to the next generation for a myriad of reasons.
So even as we're trying to build our organization, right? Because you said we working in it, you know, not on it. So because of something that you stated as far as being more open-minded to what's available to us, you know, and knowing that, hey, we've been doing this for the last 20, 25 years and not being able to understand, hey, there are new technologies, there are new systems out there. The way we need to approach our customers might not be the same as well, because their needs have changed and or the community has changed. So how do we change our mindset if we're kind of like, hey, again, that if it's not broken, don't fix the mentality?
Yeah, I think the mindset has to shift with the end of the business.
Mm,
This is a true statistic. 100% of every business owner. There is no, this is more certain than taxes because not all business owners pay their taxes. 100% of business owners will exit their business.
mm-hmm,
Either they'll
mm-hmm.
die, they'll
Right.
sell it, they'll give it to their kids, it'll be taken from them, it'll be destroyed. So everyone will exit their business eventually. They
Right.
close the doors, and so for something that is so probable it's going to happen to everyone, the question becomes is what are you doing about it?
Mm,
How are you preparing for the future? And the thing is if you do you think that the same models and practices will last to the next generation? Do you think those practices and models will continue to serve the next generation well? Will they survive in a new economy, a new
mm-hmm,
mindset, new technology? Will they be competitive in those environments? And so when you're kind of looking at that as an owner, you have to ask yourself, it might be a little painful to lose some of the control and
mm-hmm.
let your inexperienced child step in and make some calls and have some failures and try some things. But
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're really looking to keep a business legacy at last, you have to be willing to let the kids come in and make mistakes because
Mm-hmm.
the truth is when you started your business, not you, but when the owner
Right.
started their business, they were a kid at one point or a young adult and
Mm-hmm.
they made mistakes. They had to trial and error and figure it out too. And so I just think there's not a good stewardship of ownership, leadership,
Mm-hmm.
grace for making mistakes, opportunities for changing how things are. And so I think business owners would be better served by taking the risk
Mm-hmm.
and really bringing the kids in the process and letting them have the opportunity to fail and fail well.
Wow. So there's something that you mentioned going back a moment. You had mentioned about looking at the end first mentality, and part of that is that exit strategy, which you termed, or just used. Why would I want to consider my exit, especially if I'm just beginning? Like, I'm just starting out. Like, why would I want to consider the end so early on?
Yeah, I mean, when you first start out, there are other priorities, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's things that are important and there's things that are priorities. And I think, maybe an exit is not a priority, but it is
Mm-hmm.
important. And so as you build a business, you got to think, well, you're starting out. Okay, so I need to obviously get some kind of legal entity structure. When I'm working with suppliers, I probably should get some legal contracts in place, not some kind of handshake verbal agreement. As I'm, hiring people, I should probably have some kind of document that they sign about certain ethics and morals and how they're going to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
As I build out a team, I should probably have policies and procedures, these kind of things that are not necessarily needed as you build a business, but can actually save you a lot of time and money.
Mm-hmm.
Keeping accounting software and documents, keeping your bookkeeping. So these things along the way will set you up for that exit success and make it less of a headache later on. And so yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Mm. And I perused your website, and like I said, I listened to other podcasts you on. And one of the things that we don't always consider as entrepreneurs or business owners, as we become larger, we might consider it, but early on, we may not consider what our true evaluation is about our organization, and consider how much are we really worth. And when I saw that, I'm like, you know what? I haven't had that done in a while, in a while. So is that even, like, should I even, or are there like points where I should do that? Or are there points where, or anything else I might need to consider only when I'm thinking about getting out of the business, or how should I look at valuation for my organization?
Well, I think if you're looking for a 20-year-old tree, the best time to plant a tree is today, right? Not when you want the tree to happen. And so I think with anything, the more you plan and you think about it, the more success you'll have. And in a lot of ways, you kind of want to work backwards because,
Mm-hmm.
we're thinking about a goal that's far out in the future. To my earlier point, one of the things is like, what is your retirement number? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so when are you going to retire? How much money you're going to need to retire? Like how many years you're going to be retired for? How much money is that going to cost? What kind of
Mm-hmm.
standard of living do you want? And you say, oh wow, I need $5 million. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, my business is worth 500,000. So you got some work to do, right?
Right.
You have to really consider what it is that is valuable. And when selling a business, it's not what you think it's worth. Because here's the disconnect I think a lot of owners have is
Mhm.
they have this business that's provided them really good income, but what they don't realize is they bought a building 30 years ago when it was 10% as much as it is today. They bought
Mhm.
equipment 20 years ago, it's 20% as much as today.
Mhm.
They hired employees that stuck around and they haven't gotten a raise in 5 years. And so
Wow.
We all know that feeling. You finally manage to get away on vacation and the worrying starts. Will that bogus "beware of dogs" sign keep your home safe? What about that fake camera you set up? And will someone finally find your old hide and key rock? That's where ADT comes in. All that stuff, it's safe-ish. It seems fine when you don't really think about it, but you know it truly doesn't work. Instead, ADT provides security solutions that keep you actually safe, giving you real peace of mind. Because vacation is supposed to be, relaxing. Don't settle for safe-ish. Visit ADT.com today to learn more.
when a buyer comes in and looks at that business, they're like, well, the loan on this stuff is going to be more than you're making. So
Mhm.
it's not an investment. It becomes a job. It becomes a liability. And so now the buyer has to put a loan up against their house.
Mhm.
They don't have the 40 years of experience that the business owner has. And so you got to think about the buyer side of things. How do I make this attractive investment?
Right.
And one of the beautiful things about the stock market is you just throw money in, you get an investment out.
Mhm.
The business is not like that. It's hands on. And so how are you making this an actual investment for the person who's going to buy the business? And
Mm.
that's why only 20% of businesses that go on market ever sell, because business owners, they think of it from their perspective, but not the person purchasing the business.
Mm. And thinking about the two things that you mentioned, which is equipment and the building. If I've had that building for 30 years, have I done any updates to it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm using that as an example because I just heard, I don't know what I was listening to, but listening to some of the NFL teams, right? And how some of them are considering updating their stadiums, because they've had it for 30, 40 years. Should we update the building itself, or do we have to build a brand new building because it's going to cost way too much? And I'm listening to you talk about how is that going to be attractive enough, even if I bring on that type of asset, and how much I need to invest in that. And those are things that we don't always consider, especially when I have clients personally, being nonprofits and religious organizations. They don't realize that this building, yes, it looks great. It was built in the 1700s, but it doesn't have any air. Just stuff like that. So I
Yeah.
think those are the type of things we don't consider.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and remodeling buildings is important, but it goes back to is the core of what the business is doing, the foundation of the mission is
Mm-hmm.
to serve your customers or your businesses that you serve. And sometimes it can be the updating is huge, but there are other things that are important,
Mm-hmm.
like coaching, having an exit advisor, tax strategy. Everyone
Mm-hmm.
pays taxes, so you know, um, one of the things my company does is prevent you from paying a commission on the sale. But if you
Mm-hmm.
don't use a company like me, then you have to pay a 10 to 20% commission. So 10 to 20% commission, 30% taxes. You got to pay accountants and lawyers and then financial planners. You got to figure out how to invest the business. So you might only walk away with half of what you sold your business for. And so,
Mm-hmm.
updating buildings could be a value add. It can also be a distraction too. And so it's like,
Yeah.
what is it? It goes back to what value does it provide the buyer, and
Mm-hmm.
how can they justify taking out a larger loan to pay me more money?
Right. Right.
Right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. How can they service this debt? Because they're taking out debt to pay you to buy the business. And
Yeah.
so you really want to think about what is the true value add to the buyer.
Well, and sometimes as the owner, have you come across those that might value their business a little more than what it might really be? Because their
Oh,
emotion and
absolutely.
everything, their emotional investment in it might be greater than what it might actually be worth.
I mean, when you have war stories, we were close to bankruptcy and we pulled through, or I helped my community, or you literally bled, sweat, cried, everything. And you're looking at your bottom line, you're like, I'm making 500K a year, but
Hmm.
then the owner has to come in and they have to hire 3 employees plus themselves just to equal your output because you're
Hmm.
working 80 hours a week and you got 40 years of experience. They're not going to have the same perspective on that. They're going to look at it from an objective perspective, and they're going to look at the books. They're going to look at, like I said, can we service the debt on this loan? Is it a
Hmm.
good investment? Is it good? How much time am I gonna have to put into this thing? It's to them, it's kind of like a remodel.
Mm-hmm.
How do I, and is the investment worth, and then the money I got to put in and time worth the outcome? And so that's kind of how they're looking at your business. And so not yours, but just
Mm-hmm.
businesses in general when they buy. And again, it goes back. Only 20% of businesses going to market ever sell. And the problem
Wow.
is 80% of an owner's net worth on average is tied up into their business. So this is, I call it the 80% rule. 80% of
Mm.
businesses never sell, and 80% of their net worth is tied up in their business. And so it's a conundrum. But a lot of times it's because they're not willing to look at the buyer's perspective. If they do, then they create value for the buyer. The buyer will buy the business.
Mm-hmm. And so how do we change that mindset? Maybe one or two points or ideas, because sometimes, like you said, we might be emotionally involved, invested, maybe even our ego, right? Because that ego can
Oh
get
yeah,
in the way as well. So what's one or two things where we might start to open up that door to think things a little differently?
that's a great question. I haven't owned a business for 40 years and had the type of attachment to something. I'm not even 40 years old, so to imagine how you change a mindset on something that you've thought for 40 years is
Mm-hmm.
that's a tough question.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really goes down to doing the work,
Mm-hmm.
because I can say it here at the blue face, change your mindset and do this and think of it this way. But go to a financial planner, figure out
Mm-hmm.
what you need to retire, get a real honest evaluation of your business, and then whatever your valuation is, subtract 40% from it for taxes, business broker
Yeah.
if you go that route,
Right.
accountants. You have tax advisors, you have all these things, and then see if you hit your retirement number. And if you don't, then that should be a mindset changer.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, that you you got some work to do. I think mindsets change when they're hit with reality, and that's the thing. That's the only thing I can say is get out there and get real with
Mm-hmm.
real numbers and understand what's really going on.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've come across some business owners where if they hit with that reality, now all of a sudden they're depressed, right? Sometimes they're like, wow, I've been doing this, I've been on this corner for the last, and I remember when this person was born and, all those things. Like you said, you hear all them stories and how invested they really are, but unfortunately it's not as valuable as they consider because, the new owner won't have those type of memories. They won't be that connected originally. And so I think those are things that I've heard that people may not always understand, that, hey, what we've been doing for the last 40 years is not optimal, it's not efficient, and it's not as effective. And in our reality, we probably could reach a larger community if we have other types of systems in place. So like you said something about, you know, hiring 4 or 5 more people to do that one job. Um, but that part right there says how much I might have been undervalued myself because I love this job.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of pieces to this that as I'm listening to, I'm like, wow, like there's some people that I've come across really need to evaluate how much they're involved in their company, like you said, not out, or on it.
Yeah. 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 I'm going to touch a little bit on the, community piece, the connection piece, and I want to touch a little bit on the value of the owner. So for the first piece is, the owner has these connections with people
Mm-hmm.
and they built these relationships for over a few years. Why does the owner think that those people will value the relationship with the new owner in the same way? And why does the old owner think that those relationships will be just as valuable post sale as they were pre sale? And so if the original owner had a 40-year relationship with a supplier,
Mm-hmm.
they could go golfing and hang out and talk and work the business out.
Mm-hmm.
But that supplier is not going to have the same loyalty as to the new owner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that supplier jacks up the prices. Maybe they they don't honor some of the agreements that were previously there. And so with that, the customer base is not loyal because it's not the same owner. And so
Mm-hmm.
the owner can't expect the same financial status to happen for the buyer as it did for the owner. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's just not plausible. And then going back onto the ownership value piece, a lot of times the owner, when they first start the business, they have to wear many hats,
Right.
and so they've kind of learned how to wear many hats, and they've continued to wear many hats. But the problem is sometimes the owner is doing a $10 an hour job that they could have outsourced to someone,
Mm-hmm.
and then they could use their time and skills to generate $500 an hour in another skill that's higher level within the business. And so
Mm-hmm.
what happens with good buyers, they understand what time was valuable and what time wasn't valuable, and they outsource to the right people for
Mm-hmm.
efficiency, and they can extract more value out of business. And so my call to the owner is figure out where you can do this. You might go from an 80-hour work week down to a 30-hour work week, and then realize, hey, if I hire another person, I can work 10 hours a week, still kind of be semi-retired, enjoy
Mm-hmm.
life, and never have to sell the business anyways, just collect
Mm-hmm.
a paycheck. And so this kind of goes back to the other option, is like, well, maybe you can keep it in the family, pass it down to kids. And
Mm-hmm.
so, kind of going back to that legacy piece, is really evaluate, do a hard evaluation of like what your time is worth, your employees' times are worth. And that goes back to, proper staffing and
Yeah.
understanding the roles of the company.
There's one word that you said, Evan, outsource. A lot of us don't think about that word. We don't consider that word, because again, we're so invested and we don't always know where to go get the right type of services for that word outsource. So I think that's something that we need to consider even more.
Absolutely.
Even more.
Well, and if you're a business owner, say you're a plumber, you've been plumbing for 40 years, and then if I were a customer and I told that business owner, hey, I'm going to hire a handyman to do my plumbing job, and
Mm-hmm.
he's like, 1/10 of your price. Well, you're going to say, well, you should hire an expert to do the thing that, like me as a plumber that knows what we're doing, will get the job done quicker, more efficiently. You have a warranty. You're guaranteed that this is going to be fixed. If you hire a handyman, you might have this problem come back later.
Yeah.
But yet, the owners are handyman at accounting. The owners
Mm-hmm.
are handyman at handing employees. Owners are handyman at negotiating deals. And they're unwilling to outsource to the experts that can really
Mm-hmm.
take care of them and bring them more utility and time and value in their business. And so it kind of like you said, mindsets, and that's another mindset
Yeah.
owners have, is like, hey, I'm just going to do it myself and figure it, because they're capable people, very
Right.
capable people. But the problem is there's someone who's been doing that one thing for way longer that can do it
Mm-hmm.
better and maybe even cheaper. And so, yeah, definitely outsource if you can, and retain some of that value in your businesses. If you don't do it, the buyer will.
Right. Right. Well, Evan, I appreciate you coming on. This was fun, man. I mean, because these are things that, we don't often talk about. We talk about the beginning stages of, hey, do this and business plan and those type of things, but we don't also consider the end part, quote unquote end, because that, like you said, is just as important. It's not primary, but it's just as important as anything else. So I thank you very much for coming on the show. So with that being said, if someone has interest in that and they don't understand really what they need to do, like I said, I perused your website, I listened to other things, talk about, how to maneuver. But can you please let the listeners know where they can find you and or your information?
Yeah, so my name is Evan Poling. You can find me on a lot of the socials. And then I have a company called bizretire.com. And it
Mm-hmm.
kind of goes back to your point about connecting. My email is connect@bizretire.com, because
Mm-hmm.
I connect business owners to business buyers, and business buyers and owners to experts that they need in order to do the buying process well, the selling process well, and the building of business as well. And so I'm kind of the connection point that helps connect everyone together that needs to be connected. And so we do that very, very inexpensively and add a lot of value. And so would love to meet with any owners and even buyers and help them with that process.
Yeah, because I saw both of them. I'm like, hey, do I want to buy something today? Do I want to sell it? So have me consider it. But I thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
Sure, no problem. But Evan, before we go, man, I got to ask you my question. My world famous question. My would you rather question. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Would you rather choose 3 doors or a fork in the road?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think I would probably choose 3 doors. I think the illusion of choice is actually not choice. It can be tough. And so I think the fork in the road can help you doubt yourself and doubt your direction. But 3 doors, whatever's behind the doors are there. And so those are 3 more opportunities that you didn't have before. And so I think I would choose the 3 doors.
Okay. All right, cool. I thought you were going to say with the 3 doors, because I had another guest who mentioned how the doors were glass and they could see through the, doors and, the doors were open, things like that. So I was like, all right, so which way is Evan going to go, with this? But you're right, it can be an illusion, but I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Sure. Thank you very much. And of course, everyone, Evan's information will be in the show notes. And as I stated, you can, if you're looking to buy something, you're looking to sell, talk to my man, Evan. I thank y'all very much for listening today, and I'll talk to you just a little bit later.
Thanks for listening. Follow Maurice Chism on social media to stay connected and check back weekly for new episodes. Until next time, that will never work. Or will it?